Shana Tova, my friends, to the Jewish New Year 5785. It was nearly a year ago that we were all shaken to the core by the terrible news of that Simchat Torah, the October 7th massacre. This was our Twin Tower moment, our JFK assassination moment. We each remember precisely where we were when we heard the news. The world stopped for a moment. Time stood still. The clock stopped ticking as we struggled to make sense of the shattering news. We all could have used a little child that day to help us cry. Disbelief was followed by denial, and that was quickly followed by trauma and deep searing pain. Those wounds would not heal as the news only grew worse with time. And in the coming days, the details filtered through drips and drabs. It would take weeks, if not months, to absorb the extent of the massacre, to take in all the videos and graphics, to read the fateful WhatsApp messages exchanged by loved ones with their last breath, to comprehend the immensity of the cruelty, the precalculated evil, taking the lives of hundreds of people, taking hostages, the strategy of bringing the Jewish people to their knees. It would take us months to fully understand the enormity of the tragedy. The killing fields of the Nova Music Festival, the trauma of survivors, the harrowing experiences of the hostages, and the panic of the untold communities in the Gaza envelope that were penetrated and attacked. And until we understood the depravity of the enemy, who reveled in raping women in front of their families, mutilating their bodies and burning their babies to a crisp, they incinerated our loved ones alive just to magnify and maximize our collective trauma. The suffering of thousands of displaced Jewish families from the south and the north is beyond anything we could imagine. Whole families live out of hotel rooms and caravillas with no end in sight. The Holocaust threat unleashed by Iran on the night of the missiles, the night that turned into the chain of the unprecedented modern miracles for the Jewish people. The fires that rained down this summer on Israeli forests and farmlands, threatening communities and cities. Friends, the emotional trauma inflicted on the nation by Hamas's manipulation of the hostages negotiations. The danger and indignity heaped upon us by the West, trying our hands in war and compelling us to feed and fund the Hamas through humanitarian aid that ends up largely in their hands of the terrorists. The schism in the Israeli population with nightly mass protests hurled against both sides. And friends, the harshest part of this reality is that this horrific saga continues to plague our people. It is far from over. The threat of war hangs over us and is beginning to explode in the north. And the divisive open question mark hovers over the south. Friends, last year we stood here and celebrated the 50th anniversary of Yom Kippur War. And today, the Israeli Defense Forces are across the Philadelphia corridor, uncovering many smuggling tunnels from Egypt to Hamas. Our peace with Egypt seems as fragile as ever. A fickle friend they turned out to be. So the question is, where do we go from here? How do we wrap our minds around this terrible calamity? I mean, we're not asking what the IDF should do or what stance the Israeli government should take. We are asking, what can we take from this to fortify us in the upcoming year 5785? How can we soldier on when we have been beaten down? We have fallen. How can we rise? Friends, to me, the answer comes from the immediate response of the Jewish people in the aftermath of the attack. It was a response of inherent quintessential unity. Jews from all walks of life, from the extreme right and to the extreme left. They left the rhetoric behind and became one single unified people. I heard a story that only 2 weeks before the massacre, that Chabad of Tel Aviv held an outdoor Yom Kippur service. And as you can expect, the men and women were seated separately for the service. And there was a large group of fellow Jews gathered to protest the lack of equality. How could it be that an event in the city of Tel Aviv that separates men and women by services? So as the roar of protest rose to a crescendo, the rabbi's wife, the Rebbitzin, walked up and down the aisles, strengthening and comforting the congregation. And she urged them to focus on the prayer's holy words and tune out to the hateful, invective sounds. Yet many Jews were sitting there in tears, pained by the schism that brought Jews to protest against Jews who came together on to pray on Yom Kippur. Yet, friends, 2 weeks later, the enemy attacked our people, and the very people who screamed with anger now embraced with love. We as a Jewish people were enveloped in one large hug that encircled the entire nation. A Jew from Tel Aviv approached an army base with hundreds of deli sandwiches for the soldiers that were fighting. This was and continues to be a very common sight in Israel. Support for the Israeli soldiers are at an all-time high. And when the base chaplain asked the man if the sandwiches were kosher for the soldiers, he said, "I would never have dreamed of making kosher food. This is not my lifestyle." But that was until 2 weeks ago. But after the October 7th massacre, he realized he did not want to run a restaurant that didn't cater to every Jew. He invited a rabbi to kosher his kitchen, and he made it strictly kosher. The chaplain of the army was so moved that he gave the visitor a hug, and they stood together and laughed through their tears. They were unified as one. You see, before the massacre, Jews had turned against Jews. After the massacre, the entire nation embraced in supreme unity. Jews everywhere were turning to God and to the Torah. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers insisted that they would only go to battle if they're wearing their tzitzit, their prayer shawl. Thousands of pairs of these tzitzit were manufactured and distributed to the soldiers along with tefillin. They felt this was an armor protection from God, that they be safe. There was a tremendous awakening of the Jewish soul. When you shake someone to the core, that core emerges. You saw the true Jew. You might think that this was a transient phase that had long passed. And the truth is that though the phase settled down a little, there was nothing transient about it. It was a momentary glimpse into the enduring truth of the Jewish soul. Friends, if you look back on our reaction to the aftermath of the October 7th massacre, we don't see an aberration. We see a glimpse into our essential truth. The Jewish people are essentially a single unit, united at the core. Israeli society is behaving today with less outward unity that we showed last October. True. The protests and the slogans don't show always love, but that doesn't really change who we are in the essence. It's like a marriage gone bad. We're sometimes unhappy with each other, but make no mistake, this state is not our default truth. It's a surface state that only asserts itself when the core is concealed. Divisiveness is not our true state as a Jewish people, because divisiveness is inconsistent with our truth. Our connection, our oneness, our core, our infinity are all part of who we are. And we don't need to understand it for it to be true. If it doesn't need to be our constant reminders for it to be true. Because if it's true once, it's true forever. This truth emerged for several months after October 7th. It was a glimpse into our inner truth. What we see at the mass protests in Israel today is not our truth. It's an impersonation of the Jewish core. Friends, I want to share with you, Mr. Zalman Shazar, he served as the third president of Israel. His father was actually a Chabad Chassid, but Mr. Shazar, he actually joined the secular Zionist movement in his youth. He made his activism his life's mission, and with time, he went on to lead the Jewish Agency, and eventually he became the president of Israel. Now, all this time, Mr. Shazar remained inside a passionate chassid, a disciple of Chabad in his heart. He did not wear a kippah or he didn't put on tefillin daily, but he identified as a chassid, as a pious one. So one day, during a visit to New York, Mr. Zalman Shazar was visited by several Chabad rabbis, including the famous Chabad chassid Rabbi Shmuel Levitin. And in a moment of candor, Mr. Shazar asked Rabbi Levitin to help him identify his core. He said, on the outside, he said, I'm a secular Zionist. On the inside, I have never stopped being a flaming, passionate chassid. So which of me is true? And the rabbi replied with wisdom, the truth of a Jew always remains true. And the falsehood of a Jew always remains false. And it doesn't really matter how much time we spend immersed in our false outer persona, because it never becomes our truth. Our core is always pristine. Our truth is always the truth. And even if it rises once in a lifetime, even if it rises just for a few weeks to be drowned out again by protests and infighting, the truth of a Jew remains true. They tell the story of a young man who wanted to impress his wife on their first anniversary. So he asked the florist to deliver flowers to their home. When they returned home from work that day, he proudly pointed to his wife to the beautiful flowers, but he was devastated to see that the flowers were tiny and they were closed. So he called the florist in a fury. He says, what happened to the flowers? I asked you to send a beautiful bouquet for my first anniversary. These flowers are tiny. These flowers are closed. The florist says, my friend, relax. They're called tulips. In the morning they will open. In the morning they will be beautiful. Oh, he said, thank you. And he says, but what happens if they don't open in the morning? He says, no. So with your fingers, you will open them yourself. The next day, the florist calls him and asked him about the check that he sent to pay for the flowers. He said he called the bank and there was really no account behind this check. So the man said, don't worry, my dear friend, the florist. Tomorrow morning, an account will open and everything will be beautiful. So the florist says, thank you very much. But what happened if the account doesn't open? So the man replied, no, with your fingers, you can open up one yourself. Friends, our core, my core, your core, emerged in the aftermath of October 7th. And our unified reaction was instinctive. Now that so many months, almost a year has passed, we have to work to bring it up. If it doesn't open on its own, then with our fingers, we must open it ourselves. We must actively and deliberately bring back our inherent truth, our core, our unity to the forefront. And we must do this for two reasons. One, this oneness is our core truth and we must live by our truth. And secondly, our collective future as a people depends on our unity. They tell the story of Mr. Sapir Cohen, who was taken as a hostage on October 7th. And Sapir was one of the first wave of hostages to be released in November. And Sapir shared this story. Sapir says that one day the terrorists turned on the TV while they were taken as hostage in Gaza, and they saw thousands of people crowded to the hostage square, holding signs reading, "Bring them home." Sapir says that they felt so excited by the fact that religious Jews and secular Jews were standing side by side. He said before the captivity, for October 7th, the nation was so divided and the unity was so surprising and it made Sapir happy. The terrorist then turned and said, when Jews are together like this, they are very strong. And Sapir concludes that the main goal of this war, what comes out to be, is the unity of the Jewish people. Because we are a single unit. And Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live, and we can survive when we're unified as one, despite what is thrown upon us. You know, a while back, I remember being in California, seeing these tall trees called the sequoia trees in Northern California. Now, these trees can actually reach a great height, 400 feet, 400 feet. And you would think that the roots of these trees are very deep into the ground. But I was told, actually, that the roots of a sequoia tree extend only 4 or 5 feet into the ground. So you may ask, well, how does it stand 400 feet at such a tall height if the roots are only 4 feet into the ground? And the answer is unity. Because the roots of a sequoia spread out hundreds of feet in each direction. And it usually merges with the roots of the fellow sequoia trees. And the roots intertwine. And when they intertwine, they gain strength. Because you cannot knock over a tree that is held up by hundreds of other trees. Unity is a source of strength. So if this is true of trees, it is true of our people. When we are united, we are blessed and we are protected. We can't afford to drop our unity. We are Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel. And if over time our unity wears thin and is not instinctive, we must work on ourselves to make it real. With our fingers, we must open it up ourselves to truly care about one another despite our differences. Friends, there are two things about October 7th that we must never allow ourselves to forget. The pain on one hand, the unity on the other. We want our experience of that day to be seared so deeply into our consciousness forever. We want it to be as fresh 20 years from now as last year. You see, because when we are backed up against the wall and a powerful force threatens us, we cling tenaciously to life. We tap into a strength we never knew we possessed. We are each filled with an infinite reservoir of light. But we're usually unable to tap into our infinity because our consciousness, the conscious surface, obstructs access. But when we are pushed into a corner and everything we cherish is on the line, when our usual surface capacity is insufficient to save us, we throw caution to the wind and give it everything we have. When we do that, we discover just how powerful our core is, just how truth and holy our core is, just how infinite our light is. And in fact, this is the entire purpose of pain in the first place. Because a loving God doesn't cause pain to his children. A loving God gives his children access to their infinite potential through pain. And this is why we must never forget the pain. The pain is our gateway to our infinity, to our unity, to our oneness. So my dear friends, if we allow October 7th to become a memory, if we allow it to slip into the past, the present will revert to where routine began. We will gravitate to the familiar and return to our usual patterns. Yet if we never forget the bone-crushing intensity that we experienced that day, the fear of our nation, the love of our fellow, the dread of our suffering, and then their suffering, the worry for their safety in the land of Israel, and the insecurity of our invulnerability, we will be able to tap into our core every day of the year. Don't let October 7th become a thing of the past. Allow it to galvanize you into the present. With your fingers, open it up yourself. And whenever you feel yourself veering away from the total unity, pervasive love for your fellow Jew, and deep conviction in the righteousness of your path, go back to those original moments. Close your eyes and deliberately return to that terrible day. Don't allow yourself to be lulled into complacency by the ordinary patterns of the routine. Don't delude yourself into thinking you are a finite, undifferent and separate from everyone else. That is not your truth. For no matter how many days or years you live that way, it is false and will always be false, because the truth is that you are a member of an eternal and enduring nation that is united in its essence. You are an infinite light, and you can overcome the greatest challenges, including the challenge of complacency. Close your eyes, my friends, and go deep into yourself. Go past all your conscious thoughts and usual reactions. Find that place inside yourself that was provoked and awakened in the aftermath of October 7th, when you experienced the dread of those heinous events. Don't reactivate the paralysis. Activate instead the love and the unity. With your fingers, open it up yourself. Return to connectivity and oneness. Friends, we can do this. Yes, we can. The question is, will we do this? And that depends on us. They tell the story of a wise man who was renowned for answering all questions. So one day a child approached him, grasping a butterfly in his closed palm. And he asked the wise man, "What is in my hand?" And the wise man said, "A butterfly." And the young child said, "Okay, is it the butterfly alive or dead?" He figured if the man said it was alive, he will crush it. And if he said it was dead, he would let it live. "So alive or dead?" mused the wise man in response. He goes, "You want the answer? That depends on you, my child. that is in your hands. Friends, it depends on us whether we rise to the occasion and awaken our infinity and respond from our core. Yet one thing is certain. You are capable of it. Whether we do it, it's up to you and I. So may we rise to the occasion in the coming weeks and months of the new year and awaken our core. May we respond from our infinity. May we unite with every Jew, those who agree with us and those who don't. May we find unity in our collective core. And may this unity bring strength and peace. Hashem oiz li'amo yitein, Hashem yivarech es amay v'shalom. God will give his nation strength. God will bless his nation with peace. May there be peace in Israel and throughout the whole world. May our enemies see our united front and back down. May God grace us with the tenacity we need to remain connected. May he give us the strength to, with our fingers, open it up ourselves. And may the infinite God shower us with security, safety, unity, and prosperity. May he bring our hostages home swiftly and in good health. And may our nation be blessed with a year of revealed goodness. Amen. Shana Tova Umetuka. To a happy and healthy, sweet new year.